Hi, and welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today, we have a special sponsored episode from Gilead. We welcome Osinusi, an infectious disease physician and VP of clinical research for hepatitis, respiratory, and emerging viruses at Gilead. Today, we'll be discussing navigating COVID, why it still matters. Anu, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin, for having me.
Anu, you grew up in Nigeria, where viral hepatitis and other infectious diseases represent a sizable burden, and later cared for patients as a physician. How did your own background lead you to where you are today, and also help you prepare for the last 3 years?
Thanks, Kevin. That's an excellent question. So yes, I grew up in Nigeria, and I think for me, firsthand, just seeing the significant burden of infectious diseases across every age group, whether you're an adult or a child, be it viral hepatitis, tuberculosis, malaria, and just the significant morbidity, mortality, the social and economic impacts of those diseases, where you also had very limited treatment options, I think just really spurred this not only a curiosity to try and solve for some of those problems, but also this sense of purpose and impact on a larger scale. And so I think then for me, then moving over to the US, where still same burdens that you see from infectious diseases, just maybe different socioeconomic determinants of health, but still a huge impact from HIV and viral hepatitis really led me into this career that I've had as, an infectious disease physician, as a clinician researcher, and also a public health specialist. And I think over the last few years, that's come nicely together for me in my current role, where I work in drug development, of trying to put together all these different interests to try and solve for a common good with a larger impact. And so I think in many ways that had helped prepare me for what has happened in the last few years.
At the start of the pandemic, everyone was working at breakneck speed to deliver antivirals and vaccines. Can you briefly tell us what it was like at Gilead during those frantic early days? What kept your team motivated?
Yeah, it's now we all know a lot more about the, COVID-19, but, when the world first heard about this novel coronavirus, there was very little. In fact, there was nothing known. I think, I recall the first time I heard an inkling about this was December 2019, when we got this email about the mystery cases of pneumonia in Wuhan district in China, but nobody even knew then it was a coronavirus. But I don't think anyone was fully prepared for a pandemic, yet alone for a newly identified virus. But I think, at Gilead, what was our motivation was that we were determined to be part of the solution right from the start. There was, there was a lot of uncertainty. There are a lot of unknowns. But I think one thing that I was really proud of the team for is that we were never paralyzed by that fear or the fear of the unknown. We just kept pushing ahead, recognizing that if we could be part of the solution, we would want to be part of the solution. And so I think that was why we were one of the first pharmaceutical biotech companies to commit to addressing the pandemic, really relying on our 30 plus years of experience and expertise in viral diseases.
Can you elaborate on what kind of treatment options are available for patients who are hospitalized with COVID-19?
Yes. So I think, as I stated earlier, there have been tireless efforts by researchers across the globe that have really yielded, I think, remarkable treatment approaches and guidelines in a very compressed manner. And I think the entire, system needs to be applauded for that. And, these novel approaches have really helped healthcare providers make the best decisions for their COVID-19 patients. And I think, it's been multifactorial, right? So in addition to the speed lightning development of effective and safe COVID-19 vaccines, then you have the antiviral therapies, you have immune modulators, especially, including corticosteroid therapies that continue to play a critical role in the treatment of COVID-19 patients, especially those who are at the highest risk of complications or who are hospitalized with COVID-19.
How would you describe the current treatment landscape for COVID 19, especially with the new and emerging variants? Are we where we need to be?
I think, we need to definitely stay extremely vigilant, right? Because I think, as we've seen since the very start of the pandemic, many variant lineages have continued to emerge. Each of it brings like very different transmissibility or different disease outcome severity. And, despite that tremendous progress, the impact of what the future variants will bring remains unclear. So I think it's important for the field as a whole for us to keep optimizing, adhering to the treatment recommendations, prioritizing antiviral treatment for hospitalized patients at high risk, but also continuing to innovate. I think I get asked a lot that, is COVID-19 over? It's like it's done. And it's not. I mean, I think there's that misconception that it's no longer an issue because we're not seeing the height of the numbers that we saw definitely in the early days. And I think we're all thankful that the worst days of the worst pandemic in our lifetime, the worst pandemic in the last 103 years, that's over. However, there is still, we still see substantial mortality and morbidity due to COVID-19, not only in the US, but other parts of the world as well. And there is sometimes this lack of urgency to actually diagnose or treat people hospitalized with COVID-19. I think when you look at the numbers in just last year, in 2022, COVID was actually the fourth leading cause of death in the US still. And I think many experts, including those at, the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center, where they actually see people who are a lot more immunocompromised, estimate that we'll reach, almost 100,000 deaths by the end of 2023 from COVID this year. So this level of mortality is honestly nearly 3 times higher than the numbers that we see, average numbers of death from influenza, even dating back to 2010. So I think for us at Gilead, what we try and do is that, we continue to innovate, driven by this relentless pursuit of safe and effective treatments against antiviral threats, not only COVID, but including COVID. And while, I think there's been a lot of progress, there still needs to be more options for people who have COVID-19.
Can you speak to the benefits of antivirals in comparison to other treatments available, like corticosteroids?
Thanks for that question. So I think, our, experience with COVID and I think other viral infections highlights the importance of avoiding an all-size-fits-all approach when treating viral infections. And I think rather than us touting one treatment as superior to the other, it's important to explore how different drugs and medications can be used in tandem to enhance the effectiveness of each individual treatment for each and customized for each individual patient. And I think, the latest data and the guidance from the treatment guidelines supports foundational antiviral intervention to help reduce that risk of disease progression, with the addition of steroids and other immune modulators to help mitigate life-threatening inflammatory symptoms that is farther down the cascade of the disease. And so I think when you look at the NIH treatment guidelines, they encourage early intervention with FDA-approved antivirals for patients who are hospitalized due to COVID-19, particularly those at high risk of progressing to severe disease. And the guidelines also note that these FDA-approved antivirals should remain foundational treatment with or without steroids and other immune modulatory approaches for people who have actually now progressed to severe COVID-19. Because, steroids and those immune modulators are really designed to suppress the oftentimes life-threatening inflammatory symptoms that emerge from a wide array of conditions, including viral infections like COVID. But unlike the antivirals, the steroid treatments or the immune modulators do not target the virus itself. They do not target its function, but rather the subsequent cascade of inflammation that results from the viral replication and propagation. I think as this body of evidence evolves alongside the treatment landscape and the options for patients, all healthcare providers need to ensure that each treatment decision aligns with the latest COVID treatment guidelines.
How does the timing of treatment impact the progression of COVID-19?
Yeah, I think we've learned this from decades that not only with COVID-19, that with any viral infection, the earlier you treat, the better. The better the outcomes, you reduce disease progression and prevent some of the complications that you see. And so I think when we look at the COVID-19 landscape as well, when you look at many different trials examining the effectiveness of antiviral medications for COVID-19 patients, treatment is most effective when you initiate early in the course of the illness. The severity of COVID-19 progression is often lessened as a result of the advantages of treating people early. When you treat people early in the treatment course, what we see is that even when they're hospitalized, that has led to shorter hospital stays, shorter recovery times. And this is because antivirals are designed to really slow viral replication, which begins when patient is infected, continuing through largely through the disease course. So the earlier you treat, the better.
What role does real-world evidence play in the treatment of COVID-19?
I think it plays a really important role, actually, and I think even more so than maybe that we've seen with other diseases in the past. I think it's very, very critical with COVID-19, really, when you think about the pace, not only the pace of how drug development was accelerated during that time frame, but also when you recognize that as we said earlier, there are new variants. The disease course itself keeps evolving. So it's really important to continue to generate that data in the real world space. I think real world evidence increasingly offers this really crucial information on how the treatment actually is working in the actual clinical settings, which can then be used to supplement the clinical trial results. And I think what we've seen coming out of the real world evidence is that, it can tell us if treatments are working consistently across all these different stages of COVID-19 disease. And then it also gives us insights to populations maybe that weren't necessarily greatly represented in the early treatment trials. Especially, I would think, for instance, immunocompromised patients who continue to be at higher risk of severe disease from COVID-19. And so I think, it's been very useful during this pandemic, where also not only are the treatments changing, the variants are changing, clinical care itself continues to evolve as we learn new things. And so that real world evidence could actually outpace the new clinical trials and now actually assume increased incremental importance. And we also know that the field, the healthcare workers, our frontline healthcare workers, physicians are really eager to see real world evidence to guide their practice, to strengthen their treatment decisions in real time. And I would say, for us at Gilead, we continue to pursue multiple approaches to transform and bring to the fold innovative medicines and science into transformative therapies to really address the unmet needs that still remain with COVID-19. And so I think all of that being said, it's clinical trials, real world data should be considered carefully in context of all available data, looking at the type, the size of the data sets, making sure we're examining the methodologies to mitigate confounding and bias, but I think they definitely play an important role.
You brought up immunocompromised patients. Go into more detail. How has COVID-19 impacted those who are immunocompromised, and does an unmet need still exist in these patients?
I believe it actually does. And so, I think when the pandemic era protocols, we saw that, in May, as the US started relaxing some of those protocols when we approached the end of the COVID-19 public health emergency in May. However, what we see is that COVID-19 is still a concern for many people. You look at folks who are immunocompromised, and other vulnerable populations, those on dialysis, different stages of liver diseases. What we've seen over the last few years, which is consistent with what we've seen in many other diseases, the disease course, the severity varies amongst patients depending on a wide array of factors, leaving all these gaps that cannot be filled by vaccinations alone, because even in those populations, the vaccine efficacy might also be different. So while many people who contract COVID-19 experience mild to moderate symptoms, some individuals with COVID-19 continue to progress to severe or critical illness, and that's borne out by the data that we're seeing, from all the different reports. And that those are particularly elderly people, those who are over 65, people with immunocompromising conditions, including those with renal impairment, pregnant women, and other comorbidities. And these severe and critical COVID-19 cases, they typically require hospitalizations. Oftentimes, there might be ICU admissions, and they might experience really significant respiratory damage from lung tissue damage caused by the infection-induced inflammation.
You're listening to a special sponsored episode from Gilead. We're talking with Dr. Osinusi, an infectious disease physician and VP of Clinical Research for Hepatitis, Respiratory, and Emerging Viruses at Gilead. Today's topic is navigating COVID, why it still matters. As we shift to the endemic phase, why is it important to continue researching and innovating treatments for COVID-19?
Yeah, I think as COVID has had this very transformative effect on the healthcare landscape, it will continue to have that transformative effect, even as we see this shift to this endemic phase of the virus. It's not going away. It's just going to be here with us to stay, like many other viruses. Many patients are still not being adequately treated, and I still believe the death rate is still too high. It's more than what it should be. And so I think for us, at Gilead, why we want to continue to have this impact in the COVID treatment space is really because we have this commitment. We made this commitment to emerging viruses more than a decade ago, recognizing that significant unmet need and recognizing that we were uniquely positioned based on our 3+ decades of experience in antivirals to be part of a solution in making sure that there are more treatments for emerging viruses. And so just as we've done with COVID right from the beginning of the pandemic, that commitment for us is not going to wane even as we shift to this endemic scenario. As we see COVID-19 evolving with new variants emerging and experts continue to learn about this virus, we feel like it's important to relentlessly continue to pursue new treatment options that will be made available to doctors to add to their treatment arsenal, not only for the current population of patients, but even a larger, broader population of patients as well.
Is Gilead studying long COVID, post-COVID complications?
Yes, I think, as we continue to learn about this disease, long COVID is a growing concern, not only among, the treatment space, but among healthcare providers, among patients as well. And so for us, the patients as our North Star, it's a focus for us in the Gilead Research and Development team. And so with that commitment, we've been working very closely with, regulatory agencies across the globe, as well as researchers and academia, to really learn about, the unmet needs that remain in COVID-19.
And my final question, Anu, what are some of your take-home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
Yeah, I think, first of all, thank you again for the time today. And I think, as I've spoken about during our time here together, at the core of Gilead really is this really strong heritage in virology and, R&D that is really built to continue to address unmet needs in the COVID-19 pandemic. And I would like to say not only that, but we have also tried to be part of the solution for some of the biggest public health challenges that we've had over the last few decades, whether that's HIV or hepatitis C. So for us, we continue to build on that really strong heritage. And then I think in terms of disease, COVID-19, while people might not recognize that, continues to create a burden not only on patients and individuals and their communities, but healthcare systems across the globe. And it is essential for us to continue to refine our treatment management approach to help improve outcomes for patients. It's essential that the treatment options that exist are used for the right patients at the right time to really help achieve, better outcomes and substantial decreases in healthcare resource use with savings for countries and payers, and of course, ultimately, much better outcomes for patients. And so I think to also just, recap the priorities for us at Gilead, pandemic preparedness is a key part of who we are at Gilead, because for us, it's not, again, I think as an ID physician, it's not a matter of if there'll be another pandemic, it's a matter of when. So as we look as a society to be the future in the COVID-19 space, we continue to make commitments and investments to that pandemic preparedness space that would allow us to leverage our strong internal expertise, but also recognizing we can't do this alone. The external partnerships that we've built over many decades to ensure that we're not only well placed and as leaders in virology, but also forward facing and staying ready to be leaders in pandemic preparedness as well.
You've been listening to a special sponsored episode from Gilead. Our guest was Dr. Anu Osinusi, an infectious disease physician and VP of Clinical Research for Hepatitis, Respiratory, and Emerging Viruses at Gilead. Anu, thank you so much for your time and coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for having me.